My name is Edward Claymore, and when I look at my hands, the lines carved into my skin remind me of the decades I have spent shaping this land. Claymore Farm has lived through storms, droughts, harsh winters, and seasons of golden harvest, but nothing in 70 years prepared me for the betrayal that rose not from my enemies, but from my own blood. When I was young, I worked as a legal clerk, a detail very few people in this quiet part of the countryside ever learned. They knew me as a farmer, a simple man with a quiet smile and calloused hands, but beneath the soil under my nails lay years of knowledge about signatures, contracts, property laws, and all the ways people twist words on paper to steal what is not theirs. I walked away from that life when I inherited the farm. I wanted a peaceful existence with my wife, Laura, and our son, Daniel. I traded paperwork for plows, courtrooms for cornfields, legal disputes for the gentle sound of wind moving softly through the apple trees. Daniel grew up climbing these trees. He grew up chasing fireflies near the barn. Every memory I have of his childhood is framed by the land I tended and the love I poured into raising him. But children do not always grow in the direction their parents hope. Daniel grew into the world of the city, where success was measured by bank accounts, expensive suits, and the approval of people whose names he never mentioned to me. Each visit home became shorter. Each conversation felt thinner, emptier, like bread stretched too far. Still, I loved him. That is what fathers do. They love beyond reason, beyond disappointment, beyond warning signs. The day Daniel arrived wearing a navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase, I felt something shift in my bones. He walked through the house like a stranger exploring an unfamiliar museum. His eyes scanned the living room, the kitchen, the photographs on the wall, not with warmth but with calculation. When he finally sat down across from me, his smile felt out of place, a smile painted on a mask. "Dad," he said, clearing his throat, "I've been thinking about you." There was nothing wrong with the words themselves, but the way he said them made my chest tighten. "You're 70 now," he continued, "and the farm, it's too much for you. You need proper care. A place where you're safe." I stared at him. Sweat gathered in the cracks of his perfect suit. His hands kept adjusting his tie. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about his plan. "What are you saying?" I asked quietly. "A retirement home," he answered firmly. "A good one. With nurses, with community, with distance from my own house?" I interrupted. He avoided my gaze. "Dad, it's for your safety. Please try to understand." But I understood far more than he expected. I could hear how rehearsed his words were, how carefully each sentence had been prepared, as though someone had told him exactly what to say. But I did not confront him. Instead, I nodded and said, "Let me think about it." His shoulders relaxed with an ease that hurt more than anything he had said. He hugged me and left, and the moment his truck disappeared beyond the hill, I felt the silence return, heavy, watchful, cold. The next morning, the truth began to reveal itself. A letter addressed to Daniel arrived in my mailbox. He often used my address for mail, so normally I wouldn't have thought much of it, but when I held the envelope, its weight stirred an old instinct in my hands. Legal papers. I recognized the thickness instantly, the mixture of envelopes, carbon copies, notarized stamps. Something inside me whispered, "Open it." And so I did. The contents tore my heart apart before my mind could even process the words. On the first page was a property transfer contract. My farm. Claymore Farm. My home, my history, my life, sold. The buyer was a development corporation known for tearing down family land and replacing it with concrete and steel. The seller's signature at the bottom was mine. But the second I saw it, I knew it wasn't. The loops on the letters were too smooth. The pressure was wrong. Someone who forged it didn't know that an old injury in my right hand makes my downward strokes heavier than the upward ones. They didn't know how my E never fully closes at the top. They didn't know how the tail of my Y always curves slightly downward. Someone who didn't know me had copied my name. Someone who didn't care enough to learn the small details. But my son knew those details. Or at least, he once did. My breath grew shallow. My hands trembled. I sank into Laura's rocking chair, the place where she used to sing softly during summer nights. Betrayal from a stranger wounds the mind. Betrayal from a son wounds the soul. I studied each page slowly, carefully, the legal clerk in me resurfacing like a ghost stepping out of the dark. Not only had Daniel forged my signature, he had already scheduled the sale date. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until everything I ever built was taken from me. 2 weeks until I would be placed in a retirement home while my son sold my life out from under me. I closed the papers and wiped the moisture from my eyes. Not tears of weakness. Tears of truth. My son, my only child, had chosen greed over blood. But he had forgotten something. Something important. I am old, yes. But I am not blind. I am not weak. And I am not done fighting. The night after I discovered the forged documents, sleep refused to visit me. I lay awake listening to the familiar creaks of the farmhouse settling in the cool darkness, the same sounds that had comforted me for decades, but now every creak felt like a warning. The moonlight slipped through the curtains and fell across the contract papers lying on my bedside table, their crisp white edges glowing like the teeth of a predator. I turned away from them, but their presence pressed against my mind like a heavy thumb. I thought about Daniel, about the boy who once ran barefoot through the fields chasing grasshoppers, the boy who sat on my shoulders to watch fireworks, the boy who cried in my arms the day his mother died because he thought he had lost the only gentle soul in the world. Laura would never have imagined this future, never have believed her son could grow into a man who valued land more than family. She trusted him. She trusted me. And now both trusts were broken. At dawn, when the sky was painted with soft gold, I made myself a cup of tea and carried it outside to the porch. The air smelled of damp soil and wildflowers. This land had been my whole world for half a century. I had plowed it, seeded it, harvested it, protected it. I had carved my history into every ridge of every field. And my son wanted to erase it in a matter of days. I held the warm mud between my palms and took a deep breath. I had 2 choices: let the betrayal consume me, or use the very skills I retired from long ago to defend everything I held dear. I chose the second. By the time the sun rose fully above the horizon, my plan had begun to take shape. The first step was to gather evidence quietly, without alerting Daniel. Anger is dangerous when it's loud, but powerful when it's silent. I took the forged documents and placed them inside a sealed envelope. Then I searched my desk drawer for the magnifying glass Laura had bought me years ago, joking that I was becoming an old man who needed help finding his own socks. My fingers traced the smooth wooden handle as memories of her voice played gently in my mind. She was gone, but her strength remained stitched into my bones. I laid the forged papers flat on the dining table and examined each stroke of the fake signature. Whoever forged it had skill but no heart. They had practiced copying my name, but handwriting reveals the soul of a person, and this signature had no soul. I took notes in a small black notebook, the same one I used to use during my clerk years. Pressure inconsistencies, incorrect slant, unnatural spacing, deliberate pauses visible through ink pools. All these details would matter later. As I worked, the sound of a truck engine rumbled up the driveway. My heart jolted. Through the window, I saw Daniel's silver pickup approaching. Too early for a casual visit. Too early for anything pure. He walked in without knocking, as if he already believed he owned the place. "Dad," he said with forced enthusiasm, "thought I'd stop by and check on you." "Check on me?" I replied softly. "You were just here yesterday." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face, but he recovered quickly. "I was worried. You seemed a bit overwhelmed." I watched him carefully. His eyes moved across the room, searching, scanning, calculating the same way they did the previous visit. He was checking whether I had discovered something. "Everything's fine," I said calmly. "Just doing some reading." His gaze lingered on the table, dangerously close to the documents I had hidden moments before. I stepped in front of him, blocking his view. Tea? He blinked. No, I'm in a hurry. I have a meeting in town. He wasn't expecting kindness. He was expecting confrontation. When he didn't find it, he grew unsettled. By the way, he added casually, I was thinking about that retirement home we discussed. Maybe we should go visit it this week. You know, get ahead of things. Get ahead of things. Or get me out before the sale. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. Maybe, I said. Let's talk soon. He smiled, relieved, and patted my shoulder lightly, the way someone taps an object to check its durability. When he drove away, I listened to the fading sound of the engine until silence settled again. He didn't know it, but he had already lost. After breakfast, I drove into town. The road curved through familiar terrain, past the old Miller barn, past Mrs. Holloway's bakery, past the school Daniel once attended. Every landmark whispered memories of a simpler time. My first stop was the office of Harold Benson, the county's most experienced notary and an old friend of mine. Harold raised his eyebrows when I placed the forged contract on his desk. Edward, what in God's name, I need you to notarize the authenticity of this forgery, I interrupted. His confusion melted into understanding. Ah. You want proof someone falsified your signature? Exactly. He examined the pages carefully, comparing the forged signature with my real one. This is sloppy work, he muttered. They didn't even try to match the pressure lines. Greed rarely asks for perfection, I replied quietly. Harold shook his head and began preparing the affidavit. When he finished, he slid the folder toward me. This is legally airtight. Whoever forged this is in deep trouble. He doesn't know that yet, I said. My next stop was the law office of Margaret Turner, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had handled land disputes for years. When I explained the situation, her eyes darkened. Your son is attempting property fraud, she said bluntly. It's a felony. The word cut into me like a blade. But I nodded. I need your help, I said. Quiet help. You'll have it, she said. She handed me a list of documents to secure and evidence to gather. As I left her office, something in me settled. Not peace, no. Not yet. But purpose. Focus. Resolve. When I returned to the farm that evening, the sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple. I walked the field slowly, touching the wheat, breathing in the scent of earth. My land. My life. My legacy. Daniel was coming for it. But he had no idea his father was not the fragile old man he imagined. I stood at the top of the hill and looked down at the farmhouse glowing softly in the twilight. The trap was set. He just didn't know he was already inside it. The next morning arrived with a heavy stillness, as if the air itself was holding its breath for what was coming, and I woke before sunrise feeling the weight of decisions that could no longer be delayed, so I dressed, made tea, and sat by the window watching the first pale colors spread across the fields like a quiet promise of survival. For a long time I stared at the photographs on the wall, Laura holding newborn Daniel, Daniel riding his first bicycle, Daniel standing proudly with a fishing rod twice his size, and each image stung like a tiny needle reminding me of the boy he once was, before ambition swallowed innocence. I wondered if he still had even a fragment of that boy left inside him or if greed had scraped him hollow, turning him into a stranger wearing my son's face. Around mid-morning Margaret called to say she had reviewed the forged sale contract again and found multiple legal inconsistencies that could be used to corner Daniel far more effectively than I expected, and she asked if I was prepared to confront him soon, but I told her I needed one day to strengthen my heart before watching it break. After hanging up, I gathered old property papers from the wooden chest by the staircase, a chest I hadn't opened in years, the smell of cedar rising faintly as I lifted the lid, revealing documents that represented generations of sweat, heartbreak, and hope. I set them neatly on the table while the clock ticked steadily behind me, each tick sounding like footsteps approaching a truth no one wanted but everyone needed. While sorting the papers, I found a photograph tucked between two deeds, a picture of Laura leaning against the barn door laughing while Daniel, age 7, held a tiny chicken in his cupped hands. The purity of that moment washed over me, and for a second I felt the sharp urge to forgive everything, to abandon my plan, to let the land go and salvage whatever remained of my relationship with my son. But then the image shifted in my mind to the forged signature, the deceit, the betrayal, and my resolve returned like steel hardening in fire. By noon the sun was high and unforgiving, and while I worked in silence a car rolled into the driveway, its tires crunching against gravel in a slow rhythm that immediately told me it wasn't Daniel's truck, it was someone cautious. When the doorbell rang, I opened the door to find a tall man in a navy suit standing on the porch, holding a leather briefcase and wearing a polite, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Edwards?" he asked, adjusting his tie slightly. "My name is Clark Robertson. I represent the buyers who are in negotiations with your son." I stared at him, the calmness inside me turning suddenly to ice. "Buyers?" I repeated deliberately, letting the word hang between us. "There are no buyers." Clark hesitated, clearly realizing the conversation was not going as Daniel had prepared him for. "Your son assured us you were aware of the sale," he said carefully, "and that you had given full consent. In fact, he said you preferred not to handle the paperwork yourself due to your age." The audacity of those final words struck me like a slap. My age. Not my judgment, not my choice, my age. A convenient excuse for a thief. "Would you like to step inside?" I asked. His relief was visible, but he should have been wary instead. He entered and looked around with the wide-eyed curiosity of someone stepping into a place older than his own memories. I guided him to the dining table and placed the forged contract in front of him. "Is this the document you received?" I asked. He scanned it, nodding. "Yes, this is the one your son sent us, signed by you." I leaned forward slightly. "It's forged." The color drained from his face. "Forged? I did not sign this," I continued calmly. "And I have sworn legal statements from a notary and an attorney confirming it." He swallowed hard, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Edwards, if this is true, it is true. The question is whether you knowingly participated in a fraudulent sale." His eyes widened in alarm. "No, absolutely not. We acted in good faith based on your son's assurances." "Then you'll have no objection to terminating any agreements," I said, "and sending me every document he sent you." "Immediately." "Of course," he replied quickly. "I don't want my firm involved in anything illegal." As he packed his briefcase, visibly shaken, he paused at the door. "Sir, I shouldn't say this, but your son is meeting with another buyer tomorrow. A private investor. He's desperate to close the deal quickly." "I know," I said quietly. "And I'll be ready." After he left, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow swirl inside me, like winning a battle in a war I never wanted. In the late afternoon, as shadows stretched across the fields, I heard the familiar sound of Daniel's truck approaching. The moment had come sooner than expected. He walked in briskly, confidence radiating from him, unaware that the ground beneath him was already cracking. "Dad," he said with a practiced smile, "I need you to sign a couple of things for the insurance, nothing major." "Set them on the table," I replied. He placed the papers down, and I didn't need more than 2 seconds to recognize the setup: new forms, all leading toward the sale, hidden behind misleading titles. Before he could speak again, I slid the forged contract toward him. The moment he saw it, his expression shattered, shock, fear, calculation, and anger flickering across his face in rapid succession. "Dad. I can explain." "Good," I said softly. "Explain why you forged my signature." He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "Explain why you tried to sell the land your mother cherished." Silence. Thick, suffocating. He looked away, jaw tightening. "I needed the money," he whispered finally. "I invested in something, it went wrong. I was trying to fix it." "By stealing from me?" His silence was confirmation. The boy with the grasshopper net was gone. Daniel, I said slowly, my voice trembling not with fear but with heartbreak, you didn't just try to sell land. You tried to erase our family. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard, but offered no apology. No regret. Only defeat. Come tomorrow morning, I said finally. We're going to meet someone. And everything will be decided there. As he left, shoulders slumped, I watched him walk away like a man carrying the ruins of his own choices. The sky darkened, crickets began their evening chorus, and I stood alone in the doorway, feeling the fragile edge of what tomorrow would bring. The trap was no longer waiting. It was about to snap shut. The day after Daniel signed the confession arrived with a strange quietness, the kind that fills a house when something irreversible has happened, and although the farm looked the same, the barn still standing, the fields stretching wide under the pale morning sky, everything inside me felt changed. I moved through the house like a man learning to walk again, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of doorframes, the corners of walls, reminders of the life I had tried to build for my family, a life that now felt like a cracked photograph. After breakfast I stepped outside, letting the cool wind brush over my face, and watched the sun slowly rise over the eastern ridge of the orchard. Laura always loved that view. She used to say that no matter how hard life became, the sun always found its way back to us. As I stood there, I wondered if that rule still applied to fathers and sons. I spent the morning repairing a fence near the cornfield, working slowly, feeling every nail as it slid into aging wood, each hammer strike echoing through the open air. Physical work has a way of settling the mind, but today it felt like I was burying something, grief, disappointment, maybe even guilt. By noon, as sweat dampened my collar, I heard the sound of a vehicle pulling up. I turned, expecting Margaret or perhaps the delivery truck that occasionally brought supplies. But it was Daniel's truck. For a brief second, my hands tightened around the hammer. I wasn't prepared, not emotionally, not mentally, not in any way, for another confrontation. Daniel stepped out slowly, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red from lack of sleep and perhaps from crying. He approached not with the arrogance of a man who believed the world owed him something, but with the heavy steps of someone who had lost everything he claimed to control. "Dad," he said softly when he finally reached the fence. "Can we talk?" I nodded even though my heart clenched with uncertainty. We walked toward the porch and sat down on the steps, side by side but feeling miles apart. For a long time Daniel said nothing. He stared at his hands, twisting them together as though trying to break free from invisible chains. "I went home yesterday," he began quietly. The apartment felt empty. Everything felt empty. I stayed silent, letting him speak at his own pace. "I kept thinking about what you said," he continued. "About how trust is a bridge." He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "I realized I didn't just burn it, I never bothered to rebuild it. I expected you to trust me even when I wasn't trustworthy. I kept telling myself I was doing everything for us, but really, I was just trying to hide my failures." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. I had prepared myself for excuses, not confession. "Dad," he whispered, "I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking you to undo what happened yesterday. I just want to tell the truth. The real truth." He looked up at the sky for a moment, gathering courage. "I didn't just lose money," he said. "I lost people. I got involved with people who promised quick returns, and I didn't question it because I wanted to impress you. I wanted to show you I wasn't just some city son who forgot how to work. When the business fell apart, those people started threatening me. I panicked. I thought selling the farm would fix everything. By destroying the only thing we had left?" I asked quietly. "I wasn't thinking straight," he replied, tears slipping down his face. "I was scared. I made everything worse. And I'm sorry. Not because I got caught. Not because you stopped me. I'm sorry because I didn't trust you enough to ask for help. I thought you'd be disappointed in me." I closed my eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of his confession. Daniel, I said gently, I've been disappointed before. That's what parents do. But betrayal is something else. He nodded slowly. I know, he whispered. And I won't blame you if you never forgive me. We sat in silence as the wind rustled through the orchard leaves, each sound reminding me of the years lost between us. Forgiveness is a complicated thing, it doesn't bloom instantly like a flower in spring. It requires soil prepared by truth, watered by effort, warmed by time. I can't forget what you did, I said finally. And I won't pretend everything is fine. He looked down, accepting the words like a man accepting a sentence. But, I continued, I don't want this to be the end of us. His head lifted sharply, hope flickering in his eyes. Dad, I mean you can try, I said. If you want to rebuild what you burned, you start here. With me. With honesty. With work. The relief on his face came like a quiet sunrise breaking through a long night. He wiped his tears and nodded. I'll do anything, he said. Anything it takes. Then start small, I replied. No promises you can't keep. No schemes. No shortcuts. If you want to help, you come here tomorrow morning. 5 a.m. We'll work the field together. His breath caught as though the offer itself was the first real lifeline he had received in years. I'll be here, he whispered. When he left, there was no dramatic reconciliation, no sudden restoration of the past, just a fragile thread of possibility stretching between us, a thread I hoped would someday become strong enough to walk on. Later that evening, I stood alone at the edge of the field, watching the sky slowly darken. The farm was safe. The land was still mine. But more importantly, the chance to heal the wound between father and son, however small, however uncertain, had begun to take shape. And as the last light of day faded behind the hills, I whispered into the quiet air, Laura, I'm trying. I hope that's enough. Then I turned toward the house, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory. Not relief. Something quieter, gentler. A beginning. The night before the meeting passed slowly, the hours stretching like thin threads pulled tight across the darkness, and though I tried to sleep, my mind wandered through memories that refused to rest. I walked through the house with quiet steps, touching the frames on the wall, running my fingers along the old wooden banister, listening to the faint hum of crickets outside, sounds that had been part of my life for decades and might have slipped from my hands if Daniel's betrayal had succeeded. Near midnight I stood on the porch and looked out at the fields, the moonlight painting the crops silver, and I felt Laura's presence in the cool breeze brushing against my cheek. It reminded me why I had to fight, not for revenge but for protection, for honoring the sacrifices of the generations who came before me. When dawn finally broke, I dressed with deliberate calm and waited at the kitchen table until I heard Daniel's truck pull up. The uncertainty in his steps when he entered the house told me he had barely slept either. He sat across from me, avoiding my eyes, and for a long moment neither of us spoke, the silence thick enough to carve into stone. Finally I said, "We're leaving." He nodded without a word, knowing he had no place to argue. The drive to Margaret's small office in the town square was a quiet one. The air between us felt colder than the morning wind, and every time I glanced at him, I saw a boy trapped in a man's mistakes, his breathing shallow, his jaw tense. When we parked and stepped out, he hesitated. "Dad," he said quietly, "I know you're angry, but I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't think you would," I replied, "and that's the problem." Inside, Margaret was already waiting, dressed in her usual neat blazer, her calm expression masking the storm of sharpness underneath. She stood and gestured for us to sit. Daniel looked at her with a mixture of fear and resentment, realizing too late that the woman he had once dismissed as Dad's old lawyer friend now held the key to his fate. Margaret opened a file slowly, her movements careful, controlled, like a surgeon preparing instruments. "Daniel," she began, her voice steady but firm, "what you attempted is a criminal offense. Forging your father's signature on a property transfer is fraud, and if pursued, could lead to prison time." His face paled. I didn't, I was desperate. Desperation is not a legal defense, she cut in, not unkindly, but without pity. However, your father has chosen a path that benefits you more than you deserve. He looked at me, confused. I didn't look back. Margaret continued, placing a new document on the table. Before you panic, this is not an arrest warrant or a lawsuit. This is an agreement. A binding one. Your father is offering you a choice. She slid the papers toward him, and he stared at them as though they were written in a dead language. What choice? He asked. You will sign a legal confession, she explained. Acknowledging the forgery, admitting full responsibility for attempting to sell the farm without authorization, and agreeing to relinquish any future claim to Claymore Farm. Daniel blinked, stunned. Relinquish? You want to cut me out entirely? You cut yourself out the moment you tried to steal it, I said quietly. He turned toward me, his eyes wide with something I couldn't fully name, anger, fear, maybe both. Dad, you can't do this. I'm your son. And this land is my life, I replied. One you were willing to throw away for quick money. Margaret spoke again, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. If you sign this, your father will not pursue criminal charges. You will walk away with your freedom and your name intact. If you do not sign, the evidence we have will be sent to the district attorney by sundown. His breath quickened. Dad, please. I can fix everything. I'll pay you back. I'll work here, I'll do anything. If you wanted to fix things, I said, you would have come to me before forging my name. Trust is not a loan you repay. It's a bridge you chose to burn. Tears welled in his eyes, but I refused to let my heart falter. This moment wasn't about punishment, it was about the truth finally being acknowledged. He stared at the paper for a long time. Minutes passed like slow-moving clouds, his fingers trembling above the pen. Do you really want me gone? He whispered, looking up at me with a wounded expression that reminded me painfully of his childhood. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to speak clearly. I want you to take responsibility. I want you to understand the damage you caused. And I want to protect this land from anyone, even you, until you learn what it means to value something. His tears finally fell, silently, leaving faint trails down his cheeks. He picked up the pen with shaking hands, the tip pressed against the signature line. For a moment he froze, as though the weight of the world sat on that single stroke. Then, slowly, almost painfully, he signed his name. The sound of pen on paper felt like the closing of a door. Margaret removed the document, stamped it, and placed it in her secure file. It's done, she said softly. Daniel leaned back, defeated, crumbling in front of me like a man whose pride had finally collapsed under its own weight. We walked out of the office together, but not side by side. Outside, he stopped by the steps and wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand. Is this it? He asked. Am I just supposed to walk away? For now, I answered. Choices have consequences. This is yours. He swallowed, nodded once, an empty, broken motion, and walked to his truck without another word. I watched him drive away, the dust rising behind him like a fading shadow. The sun was bright, but something inside me felt dim. I had saved the farm, but at what cost? A father protects his land, his legacy, his truth. But a father also breaks a little when his son forces him to choose between blood and integrity. As I stood alone on the sidewalk outside Margaret's office, I realized something quietly devastating. The land was safe. But my family was not. And tomorrow, I would face the final reckoning of both.